I was cutting vegetables when my 5-year-old tugged my arm. Daddy, can I stop taking the pills Grandma gives me? My blood ran cold. My mother-in-law always said they were good for her. Try not to panic. I told my daughter to bring me the bottle. When the doctor checked it, his face turned ghost white. He slammed the bottle on the table and shouted, "Do you know what this is? Why is a child taking this? Who gave it to her and why?" But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window of the small 2-bedroom apartment, casting pale rectangles of light across the worn linoleum floor. Kevin Ward stood at the counter, the rhythmic sound of his knife against the cutting board filling the quiet space. Carrots first, then celery, then the bell pepper he grabbed on sale at the grocery store that morning. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd learned to cook out of necessity rather than passion. Behind him, Lila hummed softly as she arranged her collection of toy animals on the living room carpet. 5 years old, with her mother's dark curls and his own gray-green eyes, she'd been building an elaborate zoo for the past 20 minutes. Kevin glanced over his shoulder, watching her place a plastic giraffe next to a stuffed elephant, her small hands moving with careful deliberation. Pineford, Minnesota wasn't much of a town. Population barely cracking 4,000. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where the diner on Main Street still served coffee in chipped mugs and the hardware store closed at 5 on the dot. Kevin had grown up here, left for college in Minneapolis, and returned when Claire got pregnant. They'd planned to stay just a few years, save money, then move somewhere with better opportunities. That was 7 years ago. 2 years ago, Claire had been driving home from her shift at the elementary school when a pickup truck ran a red light at the intersection of Highway 71 and Pine Avenue. The doctors said she wouldn't have felt anything. Kevin didn't find much comfort in that. "Daddy," he turned, knife still in hand. Lila stood at the edge of the kitchen, one small hand gripping the doorframe, her expression uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart." She shifted her weight from foot to foot, a gesture he recognized as nervousness. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin set down the knife and wiped his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. "Of course. What's up?" Lila took a step closer, then another, until she was standing right beside him. She reached up and tugged gently on his sleeve, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Can I stop taking the pills Grandma gives me?" Kevin felt something cold settle in his stomach. He crouched down until they were eye level, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "What pills, honey?" "The white ones." Lila's eyes were wide, earnest. "She says they help me be calm. But Daddy, they make me so sleepy, even when it's not bedtime." The cold feeling spread through Kevin's chest. He kept his voice steady, even as his pulse began to hammer in his ears. "When does Grandma give you these pills?" "When she picks me up from kindergarten on Wednesdays. And sometimes on Saturdays when she visits." Lila's lower lip trembled slightly. "I don't like them. They make everything feel fuzzy." Kevin's mind raced. Donna Hallberg, Claire's mother, had been visiting regularly since the funeral. At first, Kevin had been grateful for the help. She'd pick Lila up from school when his shifts at the county planning office ran late, watch her on occasional weekends, bring over casseroles and side dishes when Kevin was too tired to cook. But over time, the help had started to feel less like assistance and more like interference. Donna had opinions about everything. The way Kevin dressed Lila, the food he fed her, the bedtime he'd established. She'd been a nursing aide for 30 years before retiring, and she wielded that experience like a badge of authority, constantly suggesting vitamins, supplements, dietary changes. Kevin had largely ignored it, writing it off as a grandmother's overprotectiveness, trying to keep the peace for Lila's sake. But this was different. This was medicine. "Lila," Kevin said carefully, "do you know where these pills are right now?" She nodded. "In my backpack. Grandma puts them in a little bottle and tells me to keep them safe." Kevin stood up, his jaw tight. "Can you show me?" Lila led him to the front closet where her purple backpack hung on a low hook. She unzipped the front pocket and pulled out a small amber prescription bottle, the kind you'd get from any pharmacy. Kevin took it from her, his hands steady despite the anger beginning to build in his chest. The label was printed clearly. Donna Hallberg, lorazepam 1 milligram. Take as needed for anxiety. Kevin stared at the bottle. Lorazepam. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd heard of it. It was a benzodiazepine, an anti-anxiety medication, an adult medication, and his 5-year-old daughter had been taking it. He unscrewed the cap and counted the pills. 8 left. The prescription had been filled 3 weeks ago for 30 tablets. That meant 22 were gone. How many does Grandma give you at a time? He asked, keeping his voice calm. Just one, Lila said, but sometimes twice in one day if she says I'm being difficult. Kevin felt his vision narrow, the way it did when he was trying very hard not to lose control. He took a slow breath, then another. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. You're not in trouble, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. But I need you to get your shoes on. We're going to see a doctor. Lila's eyes widened. Am I sick? No, Kevin said firmly, pulling her into a quick hug. But I want to make sure you're okay. That's all. 20 minutes later, they were in his aging Honda Civic, driving toward the urgent care clinic on the north side of town. Lila sat in her booster seat, kicking her feet against the back of the passenger seat, humming a song from one of her shows. Kevin kept one hand on the wheel and the other gripping the prescription bottle, his knuckles white. The waiting room was nearly empty when they arrived. A teenage boy with a badly sprained ankle sat with his mother in one corner, and an elderly man dozed in a chair by the magazine rack. Kevin approached the front desk, where a young woman with bright red hair looked up from her computer. Hi, I need someone to look at my daughter as soon as possible. What's the emergency? She asked, reaching for a clipboard. Kevin set the pill bottle on the counter. Someone's been giving her medication without my knowledge or permission. I need to know if she's in danger. The receptionist's expression changed immediately. She picked up the phone. Let me get the doctor. Within 10 minutes, they were in an exam room. Dr. Harding arrived shortly after, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Kevin knew him by reputation. He'd treated half the kids in Pineford at one point or another, and he had a reputation for being thorough and unflappable. But when Kevin handed him the pill bottle and explained the situation, Dr. Harding's calm demeanor cracked. He stared at the label, then at Lila, then back at Kevin. You're telling me someone's been giving your 5-year-old daughter lorazepam? Her grandmother, Kevin said tightly. Without my knowledge. Dr. Harding's jaw clenched. He turned to Lila, who was sitting on the examination table, swinging her legs. Hi there, Lila. I'm Dr. Harding. I'm going to ask you some questions and check a few things. Okay? Lila nodded. The examination took 30 minutes. Dr. Harding was thorough, checking her heart rate, her reflexes, her breathing. He asked her gentle questions about how she'd been feeling, whether she'd experienced any dizziness or nausea, whether she'd had trouble waking up in the mornings. When it was over, he gestured for Kevin to step outside the room. They stood in the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Kevin, Dr. Harding said quietly, this is a sedative used primarily for adult anxiety disorders and certain neurological conditions. In higher doses, it's used pre-surgery. A child Lila's age should never, under any circumstances, be taking this medication. Kevin's hands curled into fists at his sides. Is she in danger? She's showing mild symptoms. Lethargy, slower reaction times, some cognitive fogginess. But she's young and resilient. The good news is that if she stops taking it now, these effects should reverse. Dr. Harding paused, his expression grave. However, if she'd continued taking it, or if the dosage had been increased, we'd be looking at serious respiratory issues, potential developmental delays, and significant risks to her central nervous system. Kevin felt the anger surge through him like a physical force. He pressed his palms against the wall, trying to steady himself. Who would do this to a 5-year-old child? The bigger question, Dr. Harding replied, is why. This isn't just negligence, Kevin. This is deliberate. Someone made a conscious choice to give your daughter prescription medication without your consent. Kevin turned to look at the doctor. I need you to document everything. Write it all down. I need an official record. Dr. Harding nodded slowly. I'll prepare a full report. And Kevin, I'm required by law to report this. You understand that, right? Good, Kevin said. Report it. They drove home in silence. Lila fell asleep in her car seat before they even left the parking lot, her head lolling to one side, her breathing slow and deep. Too deep for a child her age after a late afternoon nap. Kevin carried her inside and laid her gently on her bed. He removed her shoes, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and sat down in the chair beside her bed. The same chair he'd sat in when she'd had nightmares after Claire died. The same chair he'd occupied through countless bedtime stories and whispered conversations about missing Mommy. He watched her sleep, his mind racing. Donna had done this deliberately. She'd taken prescription medication meant for herself and given it to a child. She'd lied to Lila, telling her the pills would help her be calm. She'd put his daughter at risk. Why? Kevin had tolerated Donna's interference because he'd thought it came from a place of grief and concern. Claire had been her only daughter. Losing her had broken something in Donna, just as it had broken something in him. He'd made allowances, tried to be understanding, tried to maintain a connection for Lila's sake. But this crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He stayed beside Lila's bed until well past midnight, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing. She slept too soundly, too still, like something precious being slowly drained of life. Kevin made himself a promise in that quiet darkness. He was done being polite. He was done making allowances. Donna had endangered his child, and he would not let that stand. When he finally rose from the chair and walked to his own bedroom, his mind was already working through his next steps. He wouldn't act rashly. He wouldn't confront her in anger. He would be deliberate, strategic, and absolutely unyielding. Because this wasn't about forgiveness or family unity or keeping the peace. This was about protecting his daughter. And Kevin would do whatever it took. The next morning was Sunday. Kevin woke early, made breakfast, and waited until Lila was settled in front of the television with her cartoons before he got in his car and drove to Donna's house. She lived in a small ranch-style home on Birchwood Lane, a neat beige structure with white trim and a well-maintained lawn. Claire had grown up in that house. Kevin had spent countless dinners there during their dating years, holidays and birthdays and ordinary Sundays. He'd sat at that kitchen table and asked Donna's permission to marry her daughter. Now, as he pulled into the driveway, all he felt was cold determination. Donna answered the door wearing a cardigan and slippers, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She smiled when she saw him, the same soft, grandmotherly smile she always wore. "Kevin, this is a surprise. Is Lila with you?" "No," Kevin said. "I need to talk to you." Something flickered in Donna's expression, but the smile stayed in place. "Of course. Come in. We can talk here," Kevin said, not moving from the front step. The smile faltered slightly. "What's this about? You look upset. You gave Lila sedatives." The words hung in the air between them. Donna's expression froze, her eyes widening just a fraction before she regained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Donna." Kevin's voice was quiet, controlled. "I found a bottle in her backpack. Lorazepam. Your prescription. 22 pills gone in 3 weeks. Donna's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Kevin, I think you're confused. I may have given her some mild calming supplements, something natural, but..." "Stop lying." The sharpness in his voice made her flinch. The soft grandmother mask slipped, just for a moment, and Kevin saw something else underneath. Something colder. "Well," Donna said, her tone shifting, becoming defensive, "Lila has been difficult lately. More emotional, more resistant. You don't always see it because you're at work. I'm just trying to help manage her behavior. You should be grateful." Kevin stared at her. "You could have harmed her. Do you understand that? You could have seriously hurt my daughter." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Donna said, waving a hand dismissively. "I raised 2 children. I worked in healthcare for 30 years. I know exactly what I'm doing. A small dose of a mild sedative is nothing to panic over." "A small dose?" Kevin's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "She's 5 years old, Donna. That medication isn't approved for children. Dr. Harding said she could have developed respiratory problems, cognitive issues." "Dr. Harding is overly cautious," Donna interrupted. "These doctors today, they're all so paranoid about everything. Back when I was working, We had common sense about these things. Kevin felt a strange detachment settle over him, as if he were watching the conversation from somewhere outside his own body. He studied Donna's face, the tight set of her mouth, the defensive angle of her shoulders, the complete absence of guilt or remorse in her eyes. This wasn't a grandmother who'd made a mistake. This was someone who believed she'd done nothing wrong. "You're not to come near Lila again," Kevin said quietly. Donna's expression hardened. "Excuse me? You heard me. No visits. No phone calls. No contact of any kind." "You can't do that," Donna said, her voice rising. "She's my granddaughter. I have a right." "You have no rights," Kevin cut her off. "You forfeited them when you decided to drug a child. How dare you?" Donna's face flushed red. "I've been there for you since Claire died. I've helped you, supported you, done everything I could for that little girl. And this is how you repay me." Kevin looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. Behind the indignation and the wounded grandmother act, he saw something he'd been too grief-stricken to notice before. A calculating quality. A coldness that had nothing to do with loss or love. He turned and walked back to his car without another word. Behind him, Donna called out, "You're making a mistake, Kevin. You need me. You can't do this alone." But Kevin was already in the driver's seat, starting the engine, pulling away from the house where his wife had grown up. He didn't look back. The following week passed in a strange, tense quiet. Kevin took Lila to school himself, picked her up himself, rearranged his work schedule to eliminate any gaps that Donna might try to fill. He watched his daughter carefully, noting the gradual changes. She seemed more alert, more energetic. Her teacher mentioned that she'd been more engaged in class, more talkative during group activities. The medication was leaving her system. But Kevin couldn't shake the questions that circled endlessly through his mind during those long evenings after Lila went to bed. He'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, turning the prescription bottle over in his hands, trying to understand. Why would Donna do this? The answer came from an unexpected source. On Wednesday afternoon, Kevin received a call at work from a woman named Patricia Klein. She introduced herself as a laboratory technician at MedTech Research, a private pharmaceutical research facility on the outskirts of Pineford. Kevin knew the place vaguely. It was a small operation, mostly conducting clinical trials and long-term studies for larger pharmaceutical companies. "Mr. Ward," Patricia said, her voice hesitant, "I'm not sure if I should be making this call. But I've been thinking about something for weeks, and after what I heard happened, I felt I had to reach out." "What did you hear?" Kevin asked carefully. "About Donna Hallberg. About the medication. I work with her sometimes. She does volunteer consulting for our facility. Data analysis, mostly. But Mr. Ward, there's something you should know." Kevin's grip tightened on the phone. "Go on." Patricia took a breath. "For the past 3 months, Donna's been bringing in documentation. Detailed logs about a child's reactions to calming medications. Sleep patterns, behavioral changes, cognitive responses. We pay participants for long-term observational data, especially for medications where we're tracking extended use patterns. It's usually adult volunteers who sign consent forms. But Donna claimed she had full authorization." The office seemed to tilt around Kevin. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Patricia replied quietly, "that Donna was being paid to document a child's response to sedative medication. She told us she had parental permission. She submitted forms with signatures. We assumed everything was legitimate." Kevin's vision narrowed to a single point. "She was collecting data on my daughter? I can't prove it was your daughter specifically, but the timeline matches. And when I heard about what happened, about the medication being discovered, I realized..." Patricia's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Ward, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned it more carefully." But Donna seemed so professional, so knowledgeable. She'd bring in these detailed reports, notes about dosage timing and behavioral observations. "We pay $500 per month for complete data sets. $500 a month." Kevin set the phone down on his desk and pressed his palms against his eyes. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't about helping Lila be calm. This wasn't about managing difficult behavior. This wasn't even about some misguided, grandmotherly concern. Donna had been using his daughter as a research subject. She'd been drugging a 5-year-old child and documenting the effects for money. Mr. Ward, Patricia's voice came through the phone speaker. Are you still there? Kevin picked up the receiver. His voice came out steady, almost calm. I need you to save every piece of documentation you have. Every log, every payment record, every form Donna submitted. Can you do that? Yes, Patricia said immediately. Yes, I can. And I need you to write down exactly what you just told me. Dates, amounts, everything. I will. Mr. Ward, I'm truly sorry. If I'd known. You didn't know, Kevin said. But you know now, and you're doing the right thing by telling me. After he hung up, Kevin sat motionless at his desk for several minutes. Around him, his coworkers typed and shuffled papers and discussed zoning regulations and building permits. Normal work, normal concerns, normal lives. His world had just shifted on its axis. Donna hadn't crossed a line out of ignorance or grief or even misguided concern. She'd done it deliberately, systematically, for profit. She'd looked at her granddaughter and seen dollar signs. Kevin stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked to his supervisor's office. I need to take the rest of the day off. Family emergency. By 5 o'clock, he was sitting across from Dr. Harding again, this time without Lila. The doctor listened to Kevin's explanation of Patricia's call, his expression growing grimmer with each sentence. That changes everything, Dr. Harding said when Kevin finished. This isn't just inappropriate medication use. This is human subjects research without proper consent, approval, or oversight. And using a child. He shook his head. Kevin, you need to involve law enforcement. I know, Kevin said, but I need documentation first. Evidence. I need this to be airtight. Dr. Harding pulled out a folder. I've completed my formal report on Lila's condition and the inappropriate medication use. This includes my professional opinion that the medication posed serious risks to her health and development. I'll submit this to Child Protective Services, but you should also take a copy to the police. Kevin took the folder. Thank you. There's something else, Dr. Harding added. If what this woman at MedTech said is true, if Donna forged documents claiming parental authorization, that's fraud. That's forgery. Combined with the child endangerment charges, she's looking at serious criminal penalties. Kevin nodded slowly. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Only a cold, resolute certainty about what needed to happen next. I'm going to make sure she's held accountable, Kevin said. For all of it. Good, Dr. Harding replied. Your daughter deserves that. They all do. Over the next week, Kevin moved with quiet precision. He didn't confront Donna again. He didn't warn her what was coming. He simply gathered evidence, piece by piece, building an undeniable case. Patricia provided copies of every document Donna had submitted to MedTech Research. The logs were damning. Detailed observations of Subject L's responses to medication, complete with dates, times, dosages, and behavioral notes. The writing was clinical, detached, treating Lila not as a child, but as a data point. Subject L exhibited increased drowsiness within 45 minutes of 1 milligram dose. Reduced activity level observed. Compliance with instructions markedly improved. Second dose administered same day due to resistant behavior. Subject became noticeably lethargic. Sleep onset within 2 hours. Week 3. Subject showing consistent response pattern. Minimal adverse effects noted. Continued documentation recommended. Kevin read each entry, his jaw clenched, fighting the rage that threatened to overwhelm his careful planning. He found more evidence in unexpected places, while picking up some of Lila's belongings that she'd left at Donna's house. A calculated move, using Lila's forgotten jacket as an excuse to enter the home, he'd managed to photograph a small notebook in Donna's study. The notebook contained handwritten notes matching the logs submitted to MedTech, along with calculations of monthly earnings and reminders about data submission deadlines. There was even a voice message saved on Donna's phone. Kevin had convinced her to let him use her phone to call his own phone because the battery had died, where she'd left herself a reminder. Extra income deposited. Finish weekly report on L's sleep patterns. Next submission due Friday. Extra income. That's what his daughter had been to her grandmother. Extra income. When Kevin finally walked into the Pineford Police Department, He carried a folder 3 inches thick. Detective James Rivera, a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes and a reputation for thoroughness, listened to Kevin's explanation without interruption. Then he spread the contents of the folder across his desk. Dr. Harding's medical report, Patricia's written statement, copies of the logs, photographs of Donna's notes, the prescription bottle, records of MedTech's payment schedule. Detective Rivera studied each document carefully. When he finally looked up, his expression was hard. "Mr. Ward, I'm going to be very clear with you. What you've described and what this evidence supports constitutes multiple serious crimes. Child endangerment, administering medication without authorization, fraud, forgery. If she signed documents claiming to be your daughter's guardian, that's a felony. And if she was conducting unauthorized research on a minor." He shook his head. "We're going to need to interview everyone involved. The woman at MedTech, your daughter's doctor, possibly even your daughter herself, though we'll do that very carefully given her age." "Whatever you need," Kevin said. "I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent possible." Detective Rivera nodded. "I'll be honest with you. Cases like this, they're tricky. Family dynamics, grandparents claiming good intentions, defense attorneys arguing miscommunication. But this evidence," he tapped the folder, "this is substantial, especially the forged authorization documents. That's going to be very hard for her to explain away." "When will you arrest her?" Kevin asked. "I need to consult with the prosecutor's office first, get an arrest warrant issued. Given the evidence, I'd expect that to happen within 48 hours. Detective Rivera paused. "Mr. Ward, I have to ask, does Ms. Hallberg know you've discovered all of this? Is there any chance she might destroy evidence or flee?" "She knows I found the pills," Kevin said. "She knows I told her to stay away from Lila. But she doesn't know about the rest. She doesn't know I've gathered documentation or that I'm aware of the research program." "Good. Let's keep it that way." The arrest happened on Tuesday morning. Kevin didn't witness it. Detective Rivera advised him to stay away, maintain distance, avoid anything that might complicate the case. But neighbors reported what happened, and word spread through Pineford within hours. 2 officers arrived at Donna's home at 7:30 in the morning. She answered the door in her bathrobe, confused at first, then increasingly agitated as they explained the warrant. She tried to argue, insisting there was some mistake, some misunderstanding, demanding to speak to her lawyer. But the officers were professional, firm, unyielding. They placed the handcuffs on her wrists while she stood in her own doorway, still protesting. "This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong. This is all Kevin's doing. He's trying to turn everyone against me." "Ma'am," one of the officers said quietly, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise that right." But Donna couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop justifying, explaining, minimizing. "It's just data collection. Everyone participates in medical research. It's perfectly legal. I had permission." "From whom, ma'am?" From her father. I had authorization. We have copies of the documents you submitted, Ms. Hallberg. The signature doesn't match Mr. Ward's signature on file." That, finally, seemed to silence her. They drove her to the county jail, processed her, photographed her, fingerprinted her, set her bail at $50,000. Kevin heard all of this from Detective Rivera later that day. He sat in his living room after picking Lila up from kindergarten, holding the phone to his ear, listening to the details with a strange sense of detachment. "She's claiming ignorance," Detective Rivera said. "Says she thought the forms were legitimate, that she misunderstood the authorization requirements, that she was only trying to help her daughter. Her attorney is already working on a defense of good intentions and procedural misunderstanding." "Will it work?" Kevin asked. "Not with this evidence," Detective Rivera replied. "The forged signature, the detailed logs, the payments, the notebook calculations, it all points to deliberate, systematic behavior. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. What happens next? Arraignment hearing in 2 weeks. She'll formally plead. Given the charges and the evidence, the prosecutor is confident we'll get an indictment. After that, it goes to trial unless she accepts a plea deal. And if she goes to trial, then we present everything. All the evidence, all the witnesses. And Mr. Ward, Detective Rivera's voice softened slightly. You may be called to testify. So might your daughter, though we'll try to avoid that if possible. Kevin looked across the room to where Lila sat on the couch, coloring in her favorite book, humming softly to herself. She seemed brighter now, more present, more herself. The foggy lethargy that had characterized the past few months was gone. Whatever it takes, Kevin said. I'll do whatever it takes. The weeks following Donna's arrest brought a strange new rhythm to Kevin's life. He continued working, taking Lila to school, maintaining the routines that gave their days structure and safety. But underneath the ordinary surface, he felt the constant weight of what was coming. The legal process grinding forward, pulling his family's private trauma into public view. Lila asked about her grandmother only once. They were eating dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, Lila's favorite, when she looked up from twirling noodles on her fork and said, "Daddy, is Grandma sick?" Kevin set down his own fork carefully. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because she hasn't visited. And usually when people don't visit, it's because they're sick. Like when Mommy was in the hospital." Kevin felt his throat tighten. Lila had been 3 when Claire died, and her memories of that time were fragmented, confused. She remembered the hospital, the hushed conversations, the adults crying. She'd asked about Mommy every day for months afterward, and Kevin had answered as honestly as he could without crushing her with the full weight of death. Now, he chose his words with the same careful precision. "Grandma isn't sick," he said gently, "but she made some mistakes. She did things that weren't safe, things that could have hurt you. So she's not going to be visiting for a while. Maybe for a long time." Lila considered this, her young face serious. "Is it because of the pills?" Kevin's chest ached. "Yes, baby. It's because of the pills." "Okay," Lila said simply. Then she went back to her spaghetti, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Children, Kevin thought, had a remarkable capacity for accepting the truth when it was given to them clearly. It was adults who complicated things, who layered on justifications and excuses and rationalizations until the truth became unrecognizable. The investigation expanded in ways Kevin hadn't anticipated. MedTech Research came under scrutiny from the state medical board. Investigators discovered that the company's protocols for participant recruitment and authorization verification were dangerously lax. Patricia's testimony revealed that Donna had been submitting data for months before anyone questioned the legitimacy of the consent forms. The facility's director, Dr. Nathan Price, insisted that they trusted Donna's credentials and experience, that she'd been a valued consultant for years. But under examination, Dr. Price's confidence crumbled. It became clear that MedTech had been cutting corners, accepting participants without proper vetting, paying for data without adequate oversight. The facility's license was suspended pending a full review. Kevin learned these details from Detective Rivera, who called regularly with updates. The detective had become something of an ally, his professional demeanor occasionally giving way to genuine concern for Lila's well-being. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you," Detective Rivera said during one of these calls. "Her name is Amanda Cross. She's handling the case personally because of the child endangerment component. She's very good, Mr. Ward. Very thorough." Kevin met Amanda Cross on a gray Thursday afternoon in her office at the county courthouse. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Kevin appreciated immediately. "Mr. Ward," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "thank you for coming in. I've reviewed all the evidence Detective Rivera collected, and I want you to understand that we're taking this case very seriously. What happened to your daughter was a violation of trust, of basic human decency, and of multiple laws." They sat across from each other at a conference table covered with documents. Amanda spread several folders out, organizing them with practiced efficiency. "I need to walk you through what we're charging her with," Amanda continued. "First, child endangerment. That's a felony in this state, given the potential for serious harm. Second, administering prescription medication without authorization. Third, fraud. She accepted payment for research participation under false pretenses. Fourth, forgery. She signed her name on authorization documents. And fifth, conducting unauthorized human subjects research on a minor. Kevin listened, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his expression neutral. The defense attorney, Amanda said, is already preparing their strategy. They're going to argue that Ms. Hallberg believed she was helping her daughter, that she misunderstood the authorization requirements, that the medication wasn't actually harmful. They'll paint her as a concerned grandmother who made an error in judgment. But that's not what happened, Kevin said quietly. No, Amanda agreed. It's not. And we have the evidence to prove it. The detailed logs, the payment records, the calculations in her personal notebook, all of that demonstrates premeditation and intent. But I need you to understand that this is going to be difficult. Juries don't like convicting grandmothers. They want to believe in good intentions. We'll need to be very clear, very precise, and very compelling. What do you need from me? Your testimony will be crucial. You'll need to describe your relationship with Ms. Hallberg, the access she had to your daughter, how you discovered the medication. I'll also need you to be prepared for difficult questions. The defense will try to suggest that you're being vindictive, that you're overreacting because of unresolved grief about your wife's death. Kevin's jaw tightened. Let them try. Amanda studied him for a moment. Mr. Ward, I can see that you're angry. That's understandable. But when you testify, I need you to be calm, measured, factual. Anger can read as instability. I need the jury to see you as a protective father who made rational decisions to safeguard his child. I can do that, Kevin said. Good. Amanda pulled out another folder. Now, there's something else you should know. Ms. Hallberg's attorney has approached us about a plea deal. Kevin's attention sharpened. What kind of deal? They're offering to plead guilty to the medication charge in exchange for dropping the other counts. She'd serve 18 months, possibly less with good behavior. The room was very quiet. Kevin could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the distant sound of voices in the hallway outside. No, he said. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Mr. Ward, I understand your feelings, but 18 months of actual prison time is not insignificant. No, Kevin repeated. His voice was calm, steady, but absolutely certain. She doesn't get a plea down. She doesn't get to avoid accountability. She endangered my daughter for money. She forged legal documents. She treated a child like a research animal. I want every charge prosecuted. I want a trial. Amanda held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right, I'll inform the defense that we're rejecting the plea offer. Thank you. As Kevin stood to leave, Amanda said quietly, Mr. Ward, most people in your position would take the plea. They'd want the certainty, the closure, avoiding the stress of a trial. But I respect your decision, and I promise you, we'll make sure the jury understands exactly what she did. The trial was scheduled for late April, for months after Donna's arrest. In the intervening time, Kevin focused on rebuilding Lila's sense of security and normalcy. They established new routines, new traditions. Movie nights every Friday, with popcorn and her choice of film. Weekend hikes at the state park, where Lila loved identifying birds and collecting interesting rocks. Bedtime stories that Kevin made up himself, featuring a brave girl hero who solved mysteries and helped people. Lila thrived. Her teacher reported that she was doing excellent work in class, making friends, participating enthusiastically in activities. The shadows that had characterized those drugged months were gone. But Kevin remained vigilant. He kept the prescription bottle in a locked box in his bedroom, evidence preserved for the trial. He maintained detailed records of Lila's recovery, sleep patterns, energy levels, behavioral observations. He documented everything, creating a stark contrast between the foggy, lethargic child Donna had been creating and the bright, energetic daughter who had emerged. One evening, Kevin received an unexpected visitor. He answered the knock on his door to find a man in his 60s, tall and thin, with weathered features and uncertain eyes. Mr. Ward? My name is Paul Hallberg. I was married to Donna. Kevin knew who he was. Claire's father, Lila's other grandfather. The man had left when Claire was 12, divorcing Donna and moving to Oregon. Kevin had met him only twice, at the wedding and at Claire's funeral. What do you want? Kevin asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Paul shifted uncomfortably. I heard about what happened. About the arrest. I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to tell you something. Kevin studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. They sat in the living room, Lila already asleep in her bedroom. Paul declined the offer of coffee, sitting on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped between his knees. I left Donna 23 years ago, Paul began, because I realized she wasn't who I thought she was. When Claire was young, maybe 7 or 8, Donna started making her sick. Kevin felt his blood run cold. What? Not obviously. Not dramatically. Just little things. Giving her medicine when she didn't need it. Keeping her home from school with vague illnesses. Taking her to doctor after doctor, seeking diagnoses. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I thought Donna was just being overprotective, overly concerned. Paul's voice was heavy with old regret. Then I caught her giving Claire medication that had been prescribed for me. Something for my back pain. She was giving it to Claire and telling the doctor that Claire was having unexplained discomfort. Kevin's hands clenched on the armrest of his chair. I confronted her, Paul continued. Asked her what the hell she was doing. And she looked at me like I was being unreasonable. Said she was documenting Claire's symptoms for medical research, that doctors needed long-term data, that she was being paid for detailed health journals. He laughed bitterly. I took Claire and left. Filed for divorce. Fought like hell for custody. But Donna was smart. She had a good reputation in the medical community, lots of professional connections. The court gave her primary custody, and I only got summer visitation. Why didn't you tell someone? Kevin asked, his voice tight. I did. I told lawyers, social workers, anyone who'd listen. But I had no proof. Just suspicions and concerns. And Donna was very good at playing the victim, at painting me as an unstable ex-husband making accusations out of spite. Paul met Kevin's eyes. When Claire chose to stay with Donna after she turned 16, when she shut me out of her life, I figured Donna had poisoned her against me. I tried to warn her when she got pregnant with Lila. Tried to tell her to be careful, to watch for signs. But Claire didn't want to hear it. She thought I was bitter about the divorce. Kevin sat back in his chair, processing this information. Claire never mentioned any of this. She probably didn't remember most of it. Donna stopped after I left, stopped making her sick. Claire just remembered that I'd abandoned her, that her mother had been there. Paul's voice cracked. And now Donna did the same thing to my granddaughter. History repeating itself. And this time, someone actually stopped her. They sat in silence for a long moment. I'm testifying at the trial, Paul said finally. The prosecutor contacted me. I'm going to tell them everything, even though it's old, even though I don't have proof. Maybe it'll help show a pattern. Maybe the jury will understand that this wasn't a one-time mistake. Thank you, Kevin said quietly. Don't thank me. I should have done more years ago. Should have fought harder. Maybe if I had, Claire would have seen the truth. Maybe she'd still be. Paul trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Kevin walked him to the door. Before leaving, Paul turned back. You're doing the right thing, Mr. Ward. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. That little girl needs someone willing to protect her. Someone who won't compromise or back down. I won't, Kevin said. I promise you that. As the trial date approached, Kevin received a call from an investigator working for the prosecution. Her name was Sophie Turner, and she specialized in cases involving medical fraud and child welfare. Mr. Ward, Sophie said, I've been digging into Ms. Hallberg's background, and I've found some interesting information. She was fired from 3 different healthcare facilities over the course of her career. Kevin sat forward. Fired? For what? The official records are vague. Protocol violations, unauthorized procedures, patient privacy concerns. But I spoke to some former colleagues off the record. One of them told me that Donna had a pattern of conducting unofficial observations on patients without proper consent. She'd document their responses to medications, track their symptoms, compile data. Sometimes she'd adjust dosages without authorization, claiming she was optimizing treatment. Why wasn't she reported to the medical board? She was twice, but the complaints were difficult to substantiate. She'd claim she was following standard care protocols, that the patients had given verbal consent, that the documentation was for quality improvement purposes. The facilities would settle with disgruntled families, fire her quietly, and that would be the end of it. So she's been doing this for years. It appears so, and based on what I'm seeing, she got more careful over time, more subtle, using her own family members, where questions of consent were murkier, where she could claim she was acting as a concerned relative rather than a medical professional. Kevin felt a cold rage settle over him. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was who Donna was, someone who saw people as objects, as data sources, as means to an end. Will this be admissible in court? Kevin asked. The prosecutor is arguing that it establishes a pattern of behavior, evidence of intent. The defense will try to exclude it as prejudicial, but Judge Thompson is pretty strict about allowing relevant background information. I think we have a good chance. When Kevin hung up the phone, he sat for a long time staring at nothing. Claire had grown up with this woman, had been raised by someone capable of treating children as research subjects. Kevin wondered how much of Claire's quiet sadness, her occasional withdrawn moods, had been shaped by growing up in that environment. He wondered what scars she'd carried that he'd never fully understood, and he felt a deep, fierce gratitude that Lila would never have to wonder, because he was going to make absolutely certain that Donna Hallberg faced the full consequences of her actions. The courtroom was smaller than Kevin had expected, almost intimate in its dimensions. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of benches for spectators. He sat behind the prosecution table with Lila's stuffed owl in his jacket pocket, a small reminder of what he was fighting for. Jury selection had taken 2 days. The final panel consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from their late 20s to early 70s. Kevin watched them carefully during the opening statements, trying to read their expressions, their body language, their reactions to the evidence being outlined. Amanda Cross stood before them, her voice clear and measured. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust, about the sacred bond between a grandparent and a grandchild, about what happens when that trust is violated in the most fundamental way possible. She paused, letting the words settle. Donna Hallberg didn't make a mistake. She didn't have a lapse in judgment. She made a calculated, deliberate decision to use her own granddaughter as an unwitting participant in medical research, administering prescription medication without consent or authorization, documenting the effects, and accepting payment for the data she collected. She turned a 5-year-old child into a source of income. The defense attorney, a man named Robert Shun, tried a different approach. He painted Donna as a confused grandmother, a retired healthcare worker who'd misunderstood modern protocols, who'd been trying to help a difficult child using methods that had been acceptable during her career. My client is not a monster, Chin said earnestly. She's a grandmother who loved her granddaughter, who stepped in to help after her daughter's tragic death, who used her medical knowledge to address behavioral concerns. Did she make errors? Yes. Did she misunderstand the authorization requirements for the research program? Yes. But criminal intent? Deliberate harm? Those are very different things. Kevin listened without expression. The trial unfolded over the course of 3 weeks. Dr. Harding testified first, explaining in clinical detail the dangers of giving lorazepam to a 5-year-old child. He described Lila's symptoms when she'd been brought to urgent care, the potential risks she'd faced, the developmental concerns that could have resulted from continued exposure. In my professional opinion, Dr. Harding said clearly, the administration of this medication to a child of Lila's age constituted a serious threat to her health and well-being. The dosage, the frequency, the lack of medical supervision, all of it was profoundly inappropriate. Patricia Klein testified next, nervously but honestly. She brought the logs, the payment records, the documentation of data submissions. She explained MedTech's research program, the consent requirements, the assumption that Donna had proper authorization. She seemed so professional, Patricia said, so knowledgeable. She'd bring in these detailed reports, perfectly formatted, clearly written. We had no reason to doubt her. Did you ever verify that she had parental authorization? Amanda asked. Patricia's voice dropped. No, we accepted the forms she submitted. We didn't check the signatures. The forged authorization documents were entered into evidence. A handwriting expert testified that the signature didn't match Kevin's verified signature, that the writing pressure and letter formation were distinctly different. Paul Hallberg testified about his experiences with Donna years earlier, about his suspicions regarding Claire's childhood illnesses, about the pattern of behavior he'd observed. The defense objected repeatedly, arguing that events from decades ago weren't relevant to current charges, but Judge Thompson allowed the testimony as background information. "I try to warn people," Paul said, his voice thick with regret. "But I couldn't prove anything then. Maybe now, with this evidence, people will finally understand what she is." Then it was Kevin's turn. He walked to the witness stand with steady steps, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat down and faced the courtroom. The jury, the judge, Donna, sitting at the defense table with her hands folded and her expression carefully neutral. Amanda asked him to describe his relationship with Donna, the access she'd had to Lila, the discovery of the medication. Kevin spoke calmly, factually, without embellishment or dramatics. He described finding the pill bottle, Lila's explanation of the medication's effects, the drive to urgent care. He described his confrontation with Donna, her defensive responses, her complete lack of remorse. "When I told her she could have harmed my daughter," Kevin said, his voice level, "she told me I was being dramatic. She said she knew what she was doing. She said I should be grateful." "Did Ms. Hallberg ever apologize?" Amanda asked. "No, not once." "Did she ever express concern for Lila's well-being?" "No, only concern about being accused of wrongdoing." Chun cross-examined him carefully, trying to suggest that Kevin was overreacting, that his grief over his wife's death had made him paranoid, that he'd misinterpreted Donna's intentions. "Isn't it true, Mr. Ward, that Ms. Hallberg provided significant help after your wife died? That she was supportive, involved, caring?" "She was involved," Kevin agreed. "But it turns out she was using that involvement to access my daughter for research purposes." "That's not what I asked. That's my answer." Chin shifted tactics. "You were angry with Ms. Hallberg, weren't you? Angry that she questioned your parenting, angry that she offered advice." "I was frustrated sometimes, yes. But I wasn't angry enough to fabricate criminal charges against her." "But you did cut off all contact immediately, without giving her a chance to explain?" Kevin met Chin's eyes steadily. "When I discovered she'd been drugging my 5-year-old daughter, yes, I cut off contact. That's what any reasonable parent would do." The cross-examination continued for over an hour, but Kevin remained calm, consistent, unshakable. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't overstate or dramatize. He simply told the truth. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, Amanda gave him a small, approving nod. Donna testified in her own defense. She sat in the witness box wearing a conservative navy dress, her hair neatly styled, her expression carefully arranged into wounded dignity. Chun led her through her version of events. She'd been a devoted grandmother. She'd stepped in to help after Claire's death. She'd been concerned about Lila's behavioral issues. She consulted her medical knowledge and provided what she believed was appropriate intervention. "I never intended to harm her," Donna said, her voice trembling slightly. "I love Lila. Everything I did was out of concern for her well-being." "Can you explain the research program participation?" Chun asked. "I've been volunteering with MedTech for years," Donna said. "They were looking for long-term observational data on childhood behavioral patterns. I thought I was helping advance medical science while also managing Lila's difficulties. I believed I had authorization." "Did you forge Mr. Ward's signature on the consent forms?" Donna hesitated. "I thought I had verbal permission. When he asked me to help with Lila, I interpreted that as broad authorization. I may have made an error in how I documented that, but it wasn't deliberate fraud." Chun nodded sympathetically. "So, but you're saying this was a miscommunication? A misunderstanding of requirements?" "Yes," Donna said. "Exactly." Amanda's cross-examination was surgical. "Ms. Hallberg, you testified that you had verbal permission from Mr. Ward. When exactly did he give you this permission?" Donna faltered. "Well, it was implied. He asked me to help care for Lila." "That's not what I asked. When did he specifically give you permission to administer prescription medication to his daughter?" "He didn't say it in those exact words, but..." "So he never explicitly gave you permission?" "No, but..." "Ms. Hallberg, you worked in healthcare for 30 years. You're familiar with the concept of informed consent, correct?" "Yes." And you understand that implied permission is not the same as explicit, documented consent for medical procedures. I suppose, but in family situations. Answer yes or no, please. Do you understand that implied permission is not sufficient for administering prescription medication to a minor? Donna's jaw tightened. Yes. Amanda held up one of the log entries. This is from the documentation you submitted to MedTech. It reads, Subject L exhibited increased drowsiness within 45 minutes of 1 milligram dose. Reduced activity level observed. Does that sound like the language of a concerned grandmother? I was being professional. Or does it sound like someone conducting clinical observations? I was documenting so I could help her better. You wrote about your granddaughter like she was a lab rat. Amanda's voice remained calm, but the words landed with devastating precision. You track her responses. You calculated dosages. You documented sleep patterns and behavioral changes. And you accepted $500 a month for doing it. I needed the money. Donna's composure finally cracked. Do you know how expensive everything is? My pension doesn't cover. She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd admitted. The courtroom was absolutely silent. So, it was about money, Amanda said quietly. You drugged a 5-year-old child because you needed the money. Donna's face flushed red. That's not. I was helping both. Helping Lila and helping research. It wasn't just about, but the money was a factor. I didn't hurt her. Dr. Harding testified that she could have developed serious respiratory problems. That continued exposure could have caused developmental delays. Were you listening to that testimony, Ms. Hallberg? I was careful. You gave her medication not prescribed to her. You gave her adult dosages. You gave her multiple doses in single days when she didn't comply with your wishes. That's what the logs show. Amanda set down the document. How is any of that being careful? Donna had no answer. The closing arguments stretched through an entire afternoon. Chen did his best, painting Donna as a flawed but well-intentioned grandmother who'd made poor decisions. He emphasized her age, her grief over losing her daughter, her decades of service in healthcare. He asked the jury to consider that mistakes shouldn't be criminalized, that the absence of actual harm should be weighed against the charges. Amanda's closing was precise and powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about whether Donna Hallberg loved her granddaughter. It's not about whether she was sad about her daughter's death. It's not even about whether she believed she was doing the right thing. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. This case is about what she actually did. She took a prescription medication meant for adult anxiety and gave it to a 5-year-old child. She documented the effects. She accepted payment. She forged authorization documents. These are facts, supported by indisputable evidence. Amanda gestured to the exhibits spread across the prosecution table. The defense wants you to believe this was a misunderstanding. But look at the logs. Look at the careful documentation. Look at the calculations in her personal notebook. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate, systematic behavior. This was a woman who looked at her vulnerable granddaughter and saw a business opportunity. She let that sink in. The defense asked you to consider that no permanent harm occurred. But that's only because Kevin Ward discovered what was happening and stopped it immediately. If he hadn't found that pill bottle, if Lila hadn't told him about feeling sleepy, how long would this have continued? How much harm might have resulted? We can't know. But we do know that Dr. Harding testified that serious damage was possible, was likely if the behavior had continued. Amanda's voice softened slightly. This little girl trusted her grandmother. After losing her mother, she needed love, stability, safety. Instead, she got medication that made her foggy and tired. She got turned into a research subject without her knowledge or consent. She got betrayed by someone who should have protected her. She walked back to her table, then turned one final time. When you deliberate, I ask you to remember something simple. If a stranger had done this to a child, would we hesitate to call it criminal? Would we search for excuses? Would we suggest it was a misunderstanding? Or will we call exactly what it is, child endangerment, fraud, forgery, and a violation of everything we believe about protecting the vulnerable? She sat down. Kevin watched the jury's faces and saw several of them nodding slightly. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. Kevin spent that time trying to maintain normalcy for Lila, taking her to school, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. But his mind was always partially in that courtroom, wondering what the jury was discussing, what they were thinking, whether justice would prevail. On the third day, Detective Rivera called. They have a verdict. Kevin arranged for a neighbor to watch Lila and drove to the courthouse. The courtroom filled quickly. News of the case had spread through Pineford, and people wanted to see the conclusion. Kevin sat in the same spot he'd occupied throughout the trial. Amanda gave him a brief, encouraging smile. Across the aisle, Donna sat with her shoulders rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Judge Thompson entered. Everyone stood, then sat again. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Thompson asked. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who'd worked as a high school teacher for 20 years, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of child endangerment, how do you find? Guilty. Kevin felt something release in his chest. On the charge of administering medication without authorization? Guilty. On the charge of fraud? Guilty. On the charge of forgery? Guilty. On the charge of conducting unauthorized human subjects research? Guilty. Donna made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Chin placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. Judge Thompson thanked the jury and set sentencing for 2 weeks later. The sentencing hearing was brief. Judge Thompson listened to the defense's plea for leniency. Donna's age, her lack of prior criminal record, her history of service in healthcare. Chin argued that probation and community service would be appropriate, that incarceration would serve no purpose. Amanda argued for the maximum sentence, emphasizing the severity of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victim, the calculated nature of the behavior. Judge Thompson considered for only a few minutes before delivering his decision. Ms. Hallberg, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. I've considered your background, your circumstances, your stated intentions. But I keep coming back to one fundamental fact. You treated a child as a source of income. You knowingly gave her medication not prescribed to her. You documented the effects. You accepted payment. And when confronted, you showed no remorse, only defensiveness and denial. Donna sat motionless, staring straight ahead. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, Judge Thompson continued. This was sustained, deliberate behavior over a period of months. You violated the trust of your own grandchild. You endangered her health and development. And you did it for money. He set his jaw. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in the state correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You'll be required to complete counseling and will be prohibited from any contact with minors unsupervised. You'll also pay restitution to cover medical and legal expenses incurred by Mr. Ward. Donna's face crumpled, but not with guilt, with anger, with outrage at being held accountable. This isn't fair, she said, her voice rising. I didn't hurt her. I was trying to help. You're all overreacting. Ms. Hallberg, Judge Thompson said sharply, I suggest you remain silent. Officers, please take her into custody. 2 bailiffs approached. Donna continued protesting as they led her away, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that everyone was being unreasonable, that she'd been persecuted. Kevin watched her go with no satisfaction, no sense of triumph. Only relief. Only certainty that he'd done what needed to be done. Over the following months, Lila continued to thrive. She started first grade in the fall, made new friends, joined a soccer team. Her teacher reported that she was bright, engaged, creative. Her drawings were full of color again. Her laughter came easily. Kevin established new routines, new traditions. They started volunteering at the local animal shelter on Saturday mornings, walking dogs, and playing with cats. Lila loved it, loved the feeling of helping creatures who needed care. Daddy, she said one Saturday as they walked a friendly golden retriever around the shelter's yard, I'm glad we don't see Grandma anymore. Kevin looked down at her, surprised. Yeah? Why's that? Because she always made me feel fuzzy and tired. And she looked at me in a way that made me feel small, like I wasn't really a person. Lila was quiet for a moment, throwing a tennis ball for the dog. Now I feel big again. Like myself. Kevin crouched down and pulled her into a hug. You are yourself. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. She hugged him back tightly. One evening, after Lila was asleep, Kevin sat on the small balcony of their apartment overlooking Pineford Lake. The water was dark and still, reflecting the scattered lights of homes on the opposite shore. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and approaching autumn. He thought about Claire, about how much she would have loved seeing Lila at this age, curious, energetic, confident. He thought about the trust Claire had placed in her mother, never knowing what Donna was truly capable of. He thought about all the what-ifs, all the ways things might have gone differently. But mostly, he thought about the choices he'd made. He'd acted with precision and determination. He'd gathered evidence, built an undeniable case, pursued justice without compromise or mercy. He'd protected his daughter from someone who'd viewed her as a commodity, who'd been willing to risk her health and development for money. Kevin wasn't a violent man. He didn't revel in vengeance. But he was absolutely, unshakably certain that he'd done the right thing. I protected her, he said quietly to the night air, to Claire's memory. I did what you'd want, what any parent would want. The lake was silent, offering no answer. But Kevin didn't need one. He stood, took one last look at the peaceful water, and went inside. Checked on Lila one more time. She was curled around her stuffed owl, breathing deeply, safely asleep. Then he went to his own room, feeling a quiet strength settle into his bones. His family had been fractured by someone else's greed and cruelty, but he'd rebuilt it through truth, courage, and an unwavering commitment to protection. And that, Kevin knew, was enough. That would always be enough.